So one person that was fairly influential on young book smarts in terms of like giving me a new perspective to view the world through was Alan Watts, right? I'm sure if you've like spent a bunch of time on YouTube, you've watched some Alan Watts before, or you've heard him in like a lo-fi hip hop song or something like that.
What you are basically, deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself.
I think that one of the most helpful ideas that he introduced me to was Zen, right? And one of the helpful ideas of Zen is that there's a duality to things. In order for something to exist, there must be something that does not exist, right? In order for there to be black, there needs to be white. In order for there to be good, there must be bad. In order for there to be something that somebody really falls in love with, there needs to be something that somebody really hates. There's a duality to things, and that's a helpful way of looking at the world. It can really pull you out of ruts, right? Especially if you're focused on, like, in my mind, the picture that I think of is that yin yang symbol. When you're focused on the black side of things and the minuscule amount of white that there is to things, I think it can be helpful to remember that you're stuck on one half of an equation, that there exists an entire other half that is completely the opposite. There is an entire world of overwhelming good in which, like, the only contrast is brought about by some tiny semblance of bad, right? But there is always a duality. There is no such thing as completely the one or the other, right? And to be completely engulfed in one implies the existence of the other, right? Because one cannot exist without the other. One defines the other. You can't have an inside without having an outside, because to have only an inside implies no existence of an outside, at which point the term becomes vacuous. It doesn't exist anymore. You're not describing anything. And I like applying this to things like criticism, or things like when you have self-talk about your life or about how you're doing in it. I think that this can be a super helpful thing to look at, right? Like, I think that as humans, and as Americans in particular, for my American boys out there, I think we like to focus on improving things a lot, improving things about ourselves, about our lot in life, about where we are, right? We're constantly on this black side of the wheel of looking at things that are not as they ought to be and expanding this minuscule amount of white, this minuscule amount of bringing order to that thing to improve it, right? But in order to bring improvement to your life, you need to constantly look at what's wrong with it. And you're very limited in what you can improve and how far you can improve it. So ironically, the people that are constantly trying to improve themselves are often the most critical. They probably think the least of themselves. And it's because they're constantly surrounded in this void of awful, of things that need to be fixed, because it's the mindset that they're in. But when that becomes so overwhelming, you lose sight of the white dot in the middle of that black side of that yin yang. I think that you need to kind of refocus. You need to realize that there's an entire other half to things, and spend time living in that for a little bit, because it'll help you refocus and get better at handling the side that you're on currently. Think about all of the things that are good. Take an abundance mindset. Think about all the stuff that's great, right? Like yesterday, for instance, and this is a very silly example, but I think silly examples are going to be better. I was thinking about how I ordered a large pizza, thinking that I could eat some of the pizza and put the rest in the fridge, and that I could save it for later. I didn't have Tupperware containers big enough to save it, and the aluminum foil that I wrapped everything in and put in the fridge was like not good enough, and I knew that the pizza was going to spoil. And I was sitting on the couch, and I had only eaten 2 pieces of the pizza because it's all I could stomach. And I was like, damn, like I feel really bad that I fucking wasted this entire pizza. And it's funny, but when you're a person with anxiety, that can trigger like a whole cascading thought process of just like all the things that you're wasteful about, you know, or whatever. But the thing about being wasteful is that in order to be wasteful, you required an abundance, you required an excess, and you're turning that into an evil thing. But it's worth bearing in mind that that evil, that excess, like provides a contrast to not having, right? And so I started to think, man, I'm happy I had enough food though, right? Like it's so much better to have more than what I needed. Like that's a wonderful position to have been in than to not have had enough. And I started kind of repairing some other thought processes in my head. I felt really bad about taking on a bunch of essay work that I had to refund or I had to reject because I got really sick. And, I'm always trying to make more money because I've been at the brink. I've been at the brink for a long time, and that was really worrisome to me. But then I started to think, I looked at my bank account and I'm like, I have more than a month or two of savings in here for the future. I have abundance, right? And so like this duality, this kind of jumping back and forth between scarcity and abundance and using that perspective really helps me get a more clear picture of things, right? And we started with pizza, but like any anxious thoughts, they kind of spiral in all sorts of things. So to have this kind of balancing mechanism to kind of look at two sides of an equation and see both of them can really help you, you know? It can really, really help you. So I started to think, it's so nice that I can reject all this essay work. I don't need to do it. I don't need it. I don't need to pay something tomorrow. And if I did, I have it in my bank. I can afford my bills at the end of the month. I don't need this stuff. And, that's not a helpful place to sit in forever because eventually you will need that work, right? But it's a helpful thing to go back to occasionally, to remember that. Remember that you don't need to do this stuff, right? Because what is the point of living in the abundance if you can't enjoy and recognize the fact that you're in it, right? If you lose track of how bad being engulfed in scarcity and only having a tiny bit of abundance is, then you kind of lose track of how wonderful it is to be surrounded by abundance and only have this itty bitty bit of scarcity, right? The scarcity of work, right? And so, yeah, I don't know if this is hippy dippy stuff that doesn't make any sense to you guys, but I hope this is like, poor people PTSD. It most certainly is poor people PTSD. And, that drive to kind of constantly do stuff is wonderful. And it got you to where you were, but, I think that you need to like keep in mind that the whole point of that hustle and to get where you were is so that you'll feel better once you're there. And to relate this again to weeb stuff, watching Iron-Blooded Orphans, this is something that the orphans don't think about through the entire show, right? They're always trying to get somewhere. One of the themes of the show is that everything is about a destination.
行くんだよ。どこに？ここじゃない、どっか。俺たちの本当の居場所に。行こう。俺たち。みんなで。
This guy is trying to lead this group of orphan children to a place that they could call home, that they could be comfortable with. And part of the show is about what is that place? Where is it? When is it? When are we going to get there? What does it take to get there, right? And all this focus on the getting there, you don't know where it is. You can't answer those questions, right? Because you're so caught up in the pursuit of things. And at some point you lose track of what you're even doing. Why? Why are you doing this? When do you get to sit down and take the break? If that's constantly at the end of the road and you don't even know how long the road is, how far it goes or whatever, just you want to keep that in mind. You want to think about that, right? So this kind of, jumping back and forth across this yin yang symbol is just really helpful to keep yourself grounded, right? To kind of just remind yourself of the other half of the equation. Live a little bit better, dude. When your adaptations become maladaptive. Yeah. What are we doing? We're gonna watch this debate. Hold on. Maybe that was the point of that one Shen comic with the bicycle thief. You might have seen it. I don't know. Yeah, it is. And people shit on that comic for reasonable reasons, right? Because they put it into the context of their arguments, or they put it in the context of socialists versus communists, or they put it in the context of like, don't call the police, or these other arguments. And I think they kind of missed the point of that comic. I'm not going to shit on Steven for shitting on the comic, but like, this is something that Steven misses about it too. Like, yeah, there's something good to be taken out of that. And the good thing to be taken out of that is that flexibility, that look across and look at the other side of things and find some kind of, more balanced happiness and knowing the in-between, right? And I think that that's something you have to do. I think that's something that's healthy to do. And I think, as somebody who's a rather black and white thinker, and gets in a lot of, loops of black and white thinking, it's just super helpful for me to be like, well, if that's your habit, if your habit is black and white thinking, this is a tool to put in your toolkit. Like, okay, this seems to be a habit that you make, but remember that if you are black and white thinking, there's a white side of things. There is a good side, just as much as there is the negative one that you want to focus on all the time. Are you branching into life coaching? No, not really, dude. Anywho, let's go ahead and jump into this.